You know, one of my New Year's resolutions for 2021 was making a new YouTube video every month, and yeah, I'm not doing that too well so far. Alright, let's get a move on. You know, 2020 was a difficult year for a lot of reasons, and like most people, I decided to indulge myself into my hobbies, like playing video games, and you know, in terms of the games I played this year, it was actually pretty good. You know, this is a hobby I really like. I've always loved getting into end of the year and, you know, looking back at everything that came out, and I also like watching the big show that Jeff Keighley puts off every single year for the Game Awards. And you know, man, just look, Jeff, I like you. I admire your passion for wanting to make this big show, but you're making it really hard for me not to feel just a little cynical for the industry. You know, doing things like throwing the Best Music Award into the pre-show and not crediting any of the composers, and not even playing music from that game, and to stuff like giving the award for Best Direction to a studio that has had literally dozens upon dozens of complaints within the last year of bad crunch and workplace culture. Not to mention, I feel like there might be a slight bias against Japanese video games within the industry, but I don't know, that's just something from my perspective. So I figure when this event kind of disappoints me, why don't I just do something myself? So welcome to my Game of the Year 2020 awards. I'm going to be looking at some of the best games I've played this year. I got dozens of different categories. Maybe not dozens, but you know, like quite a few. I have quite a few categories, and let's get us start off with, how about the top 3 best old games that I've played this year?
The hours of famine. They're after Satan. Why aren't you dead? So, you like games?
One of the things I decided to do this year was to go through the collective works of one game director, that is Suda51. I went through and played every game that he's ever written and directed, from his most popular work, No More Heroes, to the more obscure The Silver Case, which is the first game released by his company, Grasshopper Manufacture. And all this accumulated into the latest game he wrote and directed, Travis Strikes Again, No More Heroes. If for some reason you decided to avoid this game because it's quote-unquote not a real No More Heroes game, I would highly recommend going back to it and taking a look at it. If you're someone who's ever been creative and tried your hand at making art, then you're someone that could possibly relate to this game's narrative. Beneath its simple Hotline Miami-inspired gameplay lies a story about the struggle of making art and about being a creator. It's a story about Suda's career as a game maker. Travis and Badman, the father of a boss from the first game, travel into various video games, calling back to different gaming eras, using a weird haunted game console. I want to slightly spoil one of the stages. A stage towards the end is actually an epilogue to Shadows of the Damned, a game Suda wrote. The segment that you do before getting this copy of the game, Travis talks to a man who suspiciously shares the last name with an EA executive who was head of EA when they published Shadows of the Damned. This game developer talks about how he wanted the person that made this game to change stuff and physically assaulted them in order to get it done. You can read reviews and interviews about how Suda was forced to rewrite the script of Shadows of the Damned 5 times because it was quote-unquote too complicated. Travis Strikes Again feels like a deeply personal game for Suda, and it's probably my favorite game that he's written. While I don't think the gameplay is particularly memorable, I did have some fun with some of the bosses and a stage or two. If you wrote this off, I'd suggest giving it another chance. It's a game that deserves way more attention than it got. A few years ago, I decided to dive into this massive, story-heavy JRPG franchise by Nihon Falcom called their Trails series. At the time of making this video, there are 10 games that have been released, with an 11th on the way, and canonically, this is the third one coming after Trails in the Sky first and second chapter, if that makes sense. I really like the first 2 Sky games. They have memorable characters, great stories, this super in-depth world with unique NPCs, and absolutely banging soundtracks, but I would really be lying if I told you that these games are perfect. Look, I love Trails in the Sky second chapter. It's one of my favorite games of all time. But oh my god, does it have some awful pacing in the middle. Now, I think some of the final chapters in that game more than make up for it, and there is some incredibly good character writing there, but it's really hard to ignore how slow it can get sometimes. So imagine my surprise. I get to Trails in the Sky the third, and it's like a condensed version of the first 2 games. This one is all killer, no filler. The third act kind of acts as an epilogue. 6 months later, you play as this traveling priest named Kevin, who is a side character introduced in the second chapter. You go through a weird time vortex space thing, like I think that's probably what you would call it, while collecting characters from the first two games and learning more about Kevin and his childhood friend Rias. Much like the previous two games, the story and character writing are incredible, but this time, there's no long stretches of story that feel meandering. There's the main story where you're trying to figure out what the hell's going on, and there are 25 doors to find. Five of the doors are goofy minigames with sections like Estelle entering into a fishing competition. Another 5 are the doors dedicated to longer side stories, while the last 15 doors are smaller side stories. I don't want to spoil like the game or anything, but one of these star doors, specifically the 15th, might be the most emotionally drained I've got playing a game in 2020. That's all I'm going to tell you about that one. That's something you probably should see for yourself. Trails in the Sky the Third is great, and it's something I would recommend if you like story-heavy RPGs, but you should definitely play the first two games beforehand, and it kind of does carry some stuff over from the first two games, which I'm kind of neutral on. I don't really like this game's magic system all that much. It would take too long for me to sit here and try to describe you what the hell's going on with it, and the battle system's fine. Other than that, though, like, it's still a really fantastic game that, if you enjoy story-heavy JRPG franchises, I would definitely recommend giving it a shot. I often think back to Atlus's output on the PlayStation 2. They released like 7 total RPGs for the system, and in 2020, I ended up playing through one of them. Originally, I finished the first Digital Devil Saga game back in 2016, and in 2020, I finally finished its sequel, Digital Devil Saga 2. Looking back on this duology as a whole now that I finished it, it's incredibly obvious that something happened behind the scenes. The first game is fairly sparse of story up until like the last handful of hours. Then you get to the second game and it's full of story, back to front. Originally, it was being written by a science fiction author named Yu Godai until she had to leave for personal reasons, and the Persona 1 and 2 writer, Tadashi Satomi, had to build off of what she started. Unlike Atlus's Shin Megami Tensei series, where that mainly leans heavily into Judeo-Christian mythology, Digital Devil Saga brings a focus on Hinduism. Now, I don't know a lot about Hinduism, mainly just the mainstream stuff like karma and reincarnation, but I found the themes in Digital Devil Saga to be pretty compelling, and the second game is where a lot of these themes really start to come in. Digital Devil Saga takes these like Hinduistic themes, mashes them with a dystopian, cyberpunk-esque setting, and introduces it with a really flashy J-pop opening. Digital Devil Saga uses the superb press turn combat system introduced in Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne, in which you make risks to increase your turn count. Its music is grimy and guitar-filled, and it fits neatly into the setting like a puzzle piece. I might even go as far to say it's my favorite collective work by composer Shoji Meguro. And its story is genuinely compelling and well-written. I'd go as far to say as this duology are some of the boldest games Atlus have made for the PS2. Digital Devil Saga 2 is a really great game. It's easily the best old game I've played in 2020, and this has become one of my favorite PS2 RPG series. I really recommend giving it a check out. I don't know how much these games are anymore. I know they did like a big reprint a few years ago. Hopefully it's not too bad, but they also emulate well. I also emulated it for a minute, and it's pretty good. PS2 emulation, pretty good. But let's move away from best old games, and let's talk about my top 3 most anticipated games. Okay, if you were to ask me to play some sort of Exodia-esque combination of games industry people that could make the next Final Fantasy game pretty good, I'd probably give you a list that looks sort of similar to the ones that are working on Final Fantasy XVI. The producer of Final Fantasy XIV and the writer of the game's Heavensward expansion, along with the combat director of Devil May Cry 5, yeah, they're enough to make this game look pretty good. Honestly, I don't really know what else to say. We don't know when this game's coming out, but I keep watching this trailer. It looks fantastic. It looks like a weird fantasy action game, like Devil May Cry-esque, and it's Final Fantasy. Don't know who's doing the music. It kind of sounds like the Final Fantasy XIV composer. But other than that, it's looking pretty good so far. Don't really have anything else to say on that.
Ah, my stomach hurts. I need a toilet. Perfect location.
Now, like I said earlier in this video, a good portion of my game playing in 2020 was dedicated through playing Suda51's directorial body of work. I'd say that Travis Touchdown is probably the second most interesting character he's ever created, right after Sumio from the Silver Case, but that's another video for another time. No More Heroes introduced Travis Touchdown as a loser otaku with a penchant for killing. No More Heroes 2 has that one cutscene where he talks about the cycle of violence. There's not a lot good going on in No More Heroes 2, but that's a video for another time. And Travis Strikes Again brings a level of this nuance to him that I wasn't really expecting. No More Heroes 3 is going to have him fighting off space aliens and turning into a knockoff Kamen Rider. I'm pretty excited to see where this series ends up going. I'm glad they finally showed us some gameplay after Suda kept trolling us with what the hell the game's going to look like. Then it got pushed back to 2021, but I'm excited to see what the hell this thing is. What will a No More Heroes 3 look like? I'm also excited Suda's directing it, because No More Heroes 2 wasn't the best. I'm not going to call it bad, but did not like it anywhere near as much as 1. You know, Atlas has this issue where they'll announce a game really early with some teaser art or a trailer, then they just don't talk about it for years. This was the case for Shin Megami Tensei 5, but in 2020, we finally got a trailer out of nowhere, along with the announcement that it's getting a simultaneous worldwide release. That actually might be even more surprising than us even getting a trailer. Normally it takes Atlas games several months to get localized, but I'm glad this one's going to be different. So far, the game looks really good. I like the protagonist's dumb haircut, and the music sounds pretty great. Hopefully this game actually runs well on the Switch. That's probably my biggest worry with it so far. So many games on the Switch are having performance issues. It really sucks. We need a Switch Pro. Hopefully. Maybe that will come out at some point. Who knows? Yeah, Shin Megami Tensei 5, looking good. Also, in the process of writing this video, I ended up finishing Shin Megami Tensei 4 Apocalypse, the last SMT game that came out on the 3DS. And you know, I really ended up liking that game, which is surprising after hearing from so many people that the story and characters weren't good. That was a good game. No idea what the hell people are talking about. Several years ago, Sega held a poll to determine which game franchises should come back. The one that won by a landslide was Sakura Wars. Sakura Wars is this incredibly popular SRPG dating sim that was at its height in the mid to late 90s. If you haven't heard of it, then that's pretty understandable. The only one we ever got localized was the 5th entry in 2010, literally 5 years after it came out in Japan. No idea why they did that. That's not a very smart marketing strategy. Yeah. In Japan, this game is called Shin Sakura Taisen, meaning New Sakura Wars, while in America it's just called Sakura Wars. Also, side note, I hate it when publishers do this. Look man, I'm not gonna call God of War on PS4 just God of War. I'm gonna call it God of War 2018. Just like I'm gonna probably refer to this game as Sakura Wars PS4. So in Sakura Wars PS4, you play as Kamiyama, a young man assigned to lead a theater troupe who's also in charge of fighting demons. A majority of this game is structured like a dating sim where you interact with various female cast members. Sakura Wars features this dialogue system in which every choice is timed, making no choice is also choice, and sometimes you choose the intensity of your response. Seems something that would be pretty innovative for around the 90s, but nowadays it's, I don't know, it feels kind of typical, but you also really don't see it that often. I don't know, it's fine, it's a fine dialogue system. All the characters are charming and fun in their own way. They're also designed by Kubo Tite, the manga author of Bleach. At least the main characters were. You have a bunch of other characters that are done by various guest artists, and they look fine. They do look pretty good. I do think the game's art style looks a little inconsistent with the guest illustrators, but yeah, overall it's a game that looks pretty good. When you're not wooing the anime girlfriend of your choosing, then you're engaging in some good old-fashioned demon fighting. Unlike every other game in the series, this one ditches the SRPG combat in favor of an action-based system. I'm not gonna lie, these sections that end every chapter kinda just feel like an afterthought. The combat is so basic and easy, I started to zone out every time I did them. All of the social stuff was just way better, way higher quality. It's also pretty funny too. A thing that Soccer Wars made me realize is I really like Koi Koi, or Hanafuda, which, whatever the hell you call it. I liked it so much, it's what made me want to purchase 51 Clubhouse games. And later on in the year, when I played Yakuza Kiwami 2, I got unreasonably excited when I found out I could play Koi Koi. I haven't played the other games in this series available in English, like Soccer Wars for the Sega Saturn or Soccer Wars 5 So Long My Love, but this new game has me interested in the rest of the series. Probably the best 7 out of 10 I played this year. That's why I think it's the best revival of a dead franchise. Let's say you had a time machine. You decide to go back in time to the year 2015. You break into my small shitty apartment. I ask you, how the hell did you get in here? Only one phrase comes out of your mouth. How would you like to play a sequel to Deadly Premonition? I pause for a second, and I think to myself. And finally, after some silence, I look up and say, no thanks, bro. Deadly Premonition 2 is my most surprising game this year for 3 reasons. Number 1, it was announced. Number 2, it runs like literal garbage. No. And number 3, I loved every minute of it.
You know, I keep thinking about that movie we stopped to see on our way here, Zach. The Island. 2005, directed by Michael Bay. For a movie being shown at a cinema complex, it was surprisingly artistic. An experimental setting mixed with hard-hitting drama. It was art house sci-fi.
I thought the first game ended perfectly. I was really hesitant about the existence of a sequel. Another worry I had was that the game would evolve into like a weird meme version of itself, leaning way too into its status online. Instead, I got a very well-written game that ties up a few loose ends from the first game I didn't know I want tied up. York is still this lovable, quirky guy as he was in the first, and the story has some legitimately great high moments. Sure, the gameplay is janky, the frame rate kind of hurts to look at and makes my eyes bleed, and it's also incredibly glitchy, but underneath that rough exterior, there's a lot of heart. All of these characters have a goofy charm to them, and it's just hard not to crack a smile. And the story is also, like I said, really good. I have some reservations about a plot point around like the 75%-ish mark, but there are some real emotional highs by the end. You know, if you're a fan of the original game, I highly recommend checking out Deadly Premonition 2. There's a lot of good stuff in there. You know, hopefully this gets released on other platforms, because man, performance on that Switch is rough. Haven't played a game that ran this bad since Drakengard 3.
This is it, Zach. A deadly premonition. You know, for some reason I'm getting butterflies. How about you? It's time we went and saw this other world for ourselves.
But he's a good friend. I always talk to him about action flicks.
I debated calling this category best looking, but I ended up settling on best art direction, because in the long run, I think a game with better art direction will be more timeless than a game that aims for graphical fidelity. It's one of the reasons why games like, Jet Set Radio still look good today. I could sit here, write some big prose about how 13 Sentinels looks like a living watercolor painting, but I mean, I can just tell you to look at it. You can even appreciate this game's art direction through YouTube's really bad compression. I feel like it would be criminal not to put a Vanillaware game in this category. Some people complain about how the tower defense sections look, but with all the enemies and the characters being small icons, but it's satisfying seeing all the enemies explode into particles, and then towards the end, it works like when they throw hundreds of enemies at you. 13 Sentinels is a really, really beautiful game. I can't stress that enough. Great character designs, great environments, like the lighting in some areas is fantastic. It's great. This game is one of the best looking of the generation. It's incredible. Like, I don't really know what else to say. Just, I don't know, man. Just like look at the screen. Use your eyeballs and look at this stuff. Yeah. Best art direction, 13 Sentinels. It's real good. Real good.
Weird thing is, same goes
I was worried that the Final Fantasy VII Remake would go the way of so many big-budget AAA quote-unquote movie games that have a purely orchestral and subdued soundtrack. But then I get the songs in the game like the Airbuster, and every single one of my fears just evaporate. The soundtrack still uses some subdued orchestral pieces, but is also filled with rocking guitars and some electro beats. Now you could argue that this isn't fair because the game is building off the already legendary Final Fantasy VII soundtrack released over 20 years ago, composed by Nobuo Uematsu. But I would counter that statement by saying that the songs in the remake that are built off in different ways and they keep them interesting. There's like several different versions of the main battle theme, including a dance remix.
Delicious! Perfection! Work it, honey! Delicious! Perfection!
In the second to last chapter, there is a music cue that happens at the third phase of a fight. I'm not going to spoil it. I just want you to know that this music transition is probably the closest I have come to having a religious experience in the last 5 years. The original songs in the remake are mostly composed by people that worked on Final Fantasy XIII, the music being arguably the best part of that game, and they fit Final Fantasy VII just like a glove. The game even has like 30 different remixes that exclusively play through jukeboxes. There's a part of the game where you go up to a guy on the street, and he asks you,
"Hey dude, do you want a copy of my mixtape?"
Then you get a copy of his mixtape, and you can listen to it, and it is a shitty dubstep song where he sampled chocobo noises, and it just sounds the worst. I love it. I am not a fiction writer, but I can tell you that writing a story from 13 different perspectives, the amount of planning and everything that had to go into it is just crazy to think about. Talking about this game and telling you why I love the story without spoiling anything is just damn near impossible, but I'll kind of try it. 13 Sentinels follows 13 playable characters as their various storylines cross and intersect. It's a game that calls back to a lot of different classic sci-fi stories and tropes, which is fun if you're a fan of them. And despite there being 13 main characters and over 13 different storylines you have to follow, I was able to follow everything without getting too confused. I think a game deserves some praise on a narrative level if it tells a story in a way that only a game can. The non-linear nature of the story in 13 Sentinels can lead to everyone having a slightly different experience. Let's say you decide to focus on one character early on in the game, and that leads you to learning some pretty major plot points and twists, so then, when you start doing other characters, you can then have this information that can change the context of a scene. While on the other hand, if you have a friend that ignores the character you picked first, decides to look at someone different, the way how you and your friend go through the story can be pretty different. When they start doing a character story, they might not have learned a previous plot revelation that you know and this point, and vice versa. Everyone can experience the story in a slightly different way, and I don't even want to begin thinking about the sheer amount of planning and rewriting that had to go into making this story as airtight as it is. It's honestly pretty incredible, and the only thing I can say is that if you're a fan of sci-fi video games with good characters and lots of plot twists and stuff like that, you'll probably end up enjoying the narrative in 13 Sentinels. It's really hard talking about this game without spoiling anything. Like, it's one of those games where you just have to kind of trust me and just dive into it. It's really good, fantastic. Look it up. Have some fun with it, please.
I'm fine.
Okay, so now before we get to my top 5 games of the year, I want to get to this category. It's a little weird. It's called Games I Would Have Talked About If I Actually Played Them. I probably would have ended up talking about these games at some point if I made an effort to play through them, but they're both in long series, still catching up. First off, Yakuza Like a Dragon. I'm almost caught up with the Yakuza series. Like right at the butt end of 2020, I finished Yakuza Kiwami 2. Now I just have 5 and 6 left because I'm gonna skip Yakuza 3. Decided to skip that because I think going from the second to last beat-em-up game on the Dragon engine with Kiwami 2 to the first PS3 game they made would probably make me just drop off the series altogether. The sheer difference in game feel. And I talked to the friend who's really into the series. He says I'm okay if I skip it. As a friend, I trust his judgment. I really do. So, yes, got 5 and 6 left. Then I can finally play 7, and that's fine because the PS5 patch, even at the time of making this video, is not even out yet. Next game, Trails of Cold Steel 4. At the beginning of 2020, some idiot said he was going to catch up to the Trails series to play Cold Steel 4. That idiot was named Brent. He was me. I don't know. I thought maybe playing through 6 big JRPGs was feasible for me, but I got distracted and just kind of stopped, which worked out because a good fan translation for one of them is coming up as I write this video. And as I write this video, I'm also playing through Trails from Zero. Really loving my time with it. And at the time that I'm editing this video, I can tell you I finished Trails from Zero. That game is pretty good. It's fantastic. Now I'm just waiting for Trails from Azure, then I can go face first into the rest of the series. This is a series I really like so far. I imagine I'm really going to like Cold Steel 4 as well. And yeah, so I'm loving my time with this series, and I'm excited to get to Cold Steel 4 eventually. Will I get to it in 2021? Maybe. I don't know. It depends on how burnt out I get with some of these other games. We'll see. Maybe this will be my year. I'm also going through the entirety of Phoenix Wright as well, but those games aren't horribly long. This Cold Steel series is like 100 hours each game. Shit, that is a long time. I don't know. Maybe I'll get through it. Who knows? Falcom's Trail series. Like it a lot. Anyway, let's move on to the top 5. It's a pretty interesting top 5, or not really if you know my tastes. Anyway, top 5 games of 2020.
Legend of Heroes, Trails of Cold Steel 4.
Due to how spoilers work for live service games, I won't be showing any actual footage of the content, so please just enjoy this serene clip of my character fishing. Look, you can try and tell me this doesn't count, but this is also my list. I can just kind of do what I want. It's actually an interesting debate on whether or not content for live service games can count on any kind of Game of the Year list. After all, a significant amount of new story, gameplay, music, and visual content was released this year, which is why I feel okay including it here, but I'll keep it at number 5 just to kind of keep it fair. I started playing Final Fantasy XIV in August of 2020 when patch 5.3 hit, along with some improvements to A Realm Reborn's base story. It took a while, but I got out of A Realm Reborn and into the expansion. Shadowbringers, the game's third expansion, came out in 2019, but its main story did not finish until August of 2020. After the story content this year, it feels weird saying my favorite Final Fantasy story is the expansion for an MMO, but after letting it sit, it's something I'm just getting more comfortable with saying. Because of how live service games works, I don't want to spoil how anything happens, so I'll just have to speak in these very broad terms. I mentioned earlier that I think games that tell their story in a way that only a game can, and it's executed well, deserve to be highlighted. In both the original expansion content and the new content from this year, there are certain themes and plot ideas that can only really work in the context of an MMO. I won't go further in explaining how that works, but it is really interesting. It's genuinely well written, has some great characters, and the new content that was added in 2020 is some of the highest highs from the game. Aside from the story and writing, the new gameplay content within the dungeons, bosses, and raids were just fantastic. Shadowbringers introduced new raids for Nier Automata, written by Yoko Taro himself, and look, I know I'm gonna sound a little biased considering I love his games, but this is seriously the best large raid content in the game. The mechanics feel unique, and the story is incredibly interesting if you're a longtime fan of his work. Not to mention the most recent patch finished off the regular Eden Raid series, and the gameplay and story were fantastic too. Final Fantasy XIV just feels like a celebration of all things Final Fantasy. I don't like playing multiplayer games, let alone MMOs, but Final Fantasy XIV has kept me hooked. And seriously, it's fantastic. You should check it out. There's a free trial up to level 60. Oh no, I sound like one of those Final Fantasy 14 crazy people. Oh, no, this is bad. Okay, next game. We're moving on to the next game. Fuck it, get out of here. Alright, next one, number 4. Despite this game coming out in 2012, we didn't get an English translation until 8 years later in 2020, so it comes in by a technicality. Also, I choose what goes on my list. Robotics Notes is about a group of high school students that want to build a giant robot. It's a part of a larger series called Science Adventure. You've probably heard of it because one of the entries, Steins Gate, has an incredibly popular anime adaptation. One of the things I really like about this series is its approach to science fiction. They'll bring in real-world science and physics concepts to explain real-world ideas, but then also use them to explain their sci-fi concepts. It's a story about characters who want to achieve their dreams no matter what stands in their way, and I think that's why I ended up relating to the main character, Kaito, so much. He doesn't really have a dream and spends his days in high school just coasting along, not really wanting to think about his future, which in a way kind of mimicked my own high school experience. This indifference ends up leading him to follow a series of cryptic, conspiracy-ridden notes left behind by a dead man and trying to figure out if they hold any truth. Robotics Notes is about having dreams, overcoming obstacles, and building giant robots. Just because this is part of a larger series doesn't mean you need to experience the ones before it, because this one is pretty separate. Except for some stuff at the end that might come off as a bit confusing. However, if you haven't played the other games, then you're in the same positions as the characters of the main stories, so because it's really confusing to them. It's all confusing to everybody. If I had to list any issues with this game, I think the character route structure is a bit weird. The game has an in-game social media feature similar to Twitter, and you reply to people that you're friends with. Each character route in the game is canon. One route will be the game's Chapter 6, another would be the game's Chapter 7. You can view these chapters out of order accidentally, depending on who you'd reply to on the fake Twitter, which is something I don't really like. It's definitely a game I would recommend following a guide to make sure you don't view something out of order. Also, I think the game's ending kinda came a little too quick after that climax, but luckily, we got its sequel, Robotics Notes Dash, on the same day, which launched in Japan in 2019. That one is pretty good if you like Robotics Notes, then I recommended it. I'd say you should at least go through Steins Gate because one of the side characters is the main character in this one. Still, pretty good series. I liked it a whole bunch. Earlier in 2020, I listened to a spoiler cast for the Final Fantasy VII Remake. I won't say which one, I don't want them to get any hate, but one of the hosts said, and I quote, The only reason why people like the original Final Fantasy VII is because of nostalgia. I tried playing that game last year, and it was unplayable. I have like 3 problems with this statement. Number 1, I played Final Fantasy VII for the first time in 2019, and I loved it. Sure, I had been spoiled on the big twist at the end of Disc 1. You know the one. It's the one everybody talks about. This one's been memed. You know it, yeah. I'm pretty sure if you're watching this video and you've been on the internet for any length of time, you probably know the spoiler I'm talking about. But that spoiler acted like a magnet and kept me away from literally every other plot point in the story. Playing it in 2019, I had a really great experience. I had a really great time playing through this story that mostly I hadn't really been spoiled on at all. Number 2, I know like 2 people who have started and or played it within the last 6 months and absolutely loved it. And number 3, I really hate it when people describe something they don't like as unblankable. A game isn't unplayable just because you don't like it. Now, you want to know a game that is both good and playable? Final Fantasy VII Remake. To quote Tim Rogers of the YouTube channel Action Button in his review of the Final Fantasy VII Remake,
The Final Fantasy VII Remake is more Final Fantasy VII than Final Fantasy VII.
This Final Fantasy VII Remake takes elements from the original and puts them under a microscope. For example, there's one scene I want to look at in particular. There's a conversation between Tifa and Aerith in the sewers where they talk about how they want to go shopping and they're going to make Cloud carry all of their bags. This one conversation gives more depth and characterization to their relationship than the original ever did. Of course, there is a lot of contention regarding the various changes, especially for the ones in Chapter 18. Right now, I want to remain optimistic, but it's easily something that could go south depending on its execution. Also, the gameplay in Final Fantasy VII Remake is pretty good. It feels like a nice adaptation of the turn-based elements of the original game. I'm glad all of the weird enemies of the original got in, like Hell House, who's just a really big boss now. The remake really feels like a celebration of the original in a lot of ways. Definitely one of the best games I've played this year. I definitely recommend if you like the original game. Hoping they release a PS5 version at some point. Gets rid of all the squeeze-throughs. Kind of like, look, I know we make fun of like games having tight corridors characters have to squeeze through, but man, Final Fantasy VII Remake has a lot of those. Like a lot. Like it's one of the first games I've played where it's incredibly noticeable. Really good game despite that though. There's some great stuff. This game already won Best Music. You know how I feel about a lot of it. It's great. Excited for the next part. Moving on. Here's a controversial opinion, or a hot take. I think Persona 5 is a good game. Now if you're sitting there going, Brent, what the hell are you talking about? Well, congratulations, you've somehow avoided the most annoying parts of stupid, dumb video game internet discourse for the last few years. You know, after a while, I started to think maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was actually a bad game. But then I got to replay it through Persona 5 Royal and realized, no, Persona 5 is great. It's always been a good game. Persona 5 Royal makes it even better. Persona 5 Royal makes a ton of adjustments to the base game that makes it way more fun to play. I won't sit here and list them all because that would literally take forever, but let's go through some of the highlights. Morgana doesn't tell you to go to bed anymore so you can raise social stats even after going into a dungeon. Baton Pass is now given to all party members when they join you, meaning you can incorporate it into your strategies. Majority of the text around the first 2 dungeons has been relocalized in the voice acting re-recording, making it read a lot better. Dungeons have slightly remixed to be shorter and have new collectibles. One of the things I want to see move forward with the series is Personas now have traits, which are these passive abilities that can help change things up. Also, all the new music in this, just banger after banger, it's so good. Shoji Meguro, one of my favorite game composers, this man does not miss. Then there's the 2 new confidants and the 3rd semester storyline, and Akechi now has a separate confidant, rather than one that levels with the story. It elevates his character from like a 4 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10, and just so much more. It feels weird to say that the new story content in Royal is better written than the main game, but both the stakes and the main villain feel more personal this time around. I'm not going to spoil it, but the new story content has elevated Persona 5 for me to being maybe my favorite Persona game. It's kind of up there with Persona 4. Absolutely worth going through the game again to experience what they've done. If you've been itching for a replay, haven't played it yet, get Royal. the best version of an already pretty good game. It's great. You know, between this and Shin Megami Tensei 4 Apocalypse, I'm starting to think maybe people that play Atlas games just have bad opinions. Except for me, of course. I have 100% objectively correct opinions. It's so hard being right all the time, but, you know, somebody's got to do it.
That was great! Thanks! Damn. No way out.
I didn't actually write anything for this. I just wrote in big, bold, 48-point font on my script here. This game is good. Don't spoil it. That's it. That's it. That's all I wrote. I've already talked about how it won Best Narrative and Best Art Direction for me. It was almost going to get Best Music, but I liked some of the stuff in Final Fantasy VII Remake a little more. 13 Sentinels is really good. You know what? Hold on. I can say this about it. Even if you don't end up liking it, you play the game and you don't end up liking 13 Sentinels, at the very least, I think you could probably say that it's very ambitious. It's one of the most ambitious narratives I've seen put forth in a game. And its execution is pretty good. It does a pretty good job with that. 13 Sentinels is one of the most, like, me games I've ever played. It fits firmly in my taste. It's great. It's good. I don't know what else to say. It's a really good game. Great story. Great music. It looks beautiful. And like I said, even if you don't end up liking the story, I think you could probably appreciate the sheer amount of ambition that goes into making something like this. Either way, 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim, it's my game of the year. It's great, it's good, it's fantastic. That's, I don't have a thesaurus near me. Yeah, it's a really good game. You should probably play it. That's about all I got. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little venture. My game of the year stuff. Meant to get this out in January. I'm recording this mid-February. That's not good. That's bad. Oh no. Anyway, I make videos, maybe, sometimes. I made a bad 13 Sentinels review. You can go look at that, I guess. And this video's been okay, I think. I haven't edited it yet, but I imagine it's okay. I stream on Twitch, stuff like that. Next video, don't know what it's gonna be, but I have some ideas. I'm going through some current ideas. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Take care. Bye.